We're back. We're joined by a guy who I turn to with both alacrity and great appreciation anytime we get a chance, especially when there are the really serious problems with respect to the advent of restrictions on our freedom of religion, freedom of speech, um, freedom even of understanding the nature of threats that we're facing. And that would be Robert Spencer. Robert is the author of some 23 books, including The Truth About Muhammad, written extensively about jihad. He is the director of a fabulous organization, jihadwatch.org, a project of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and a dear friend as well as a mentor to many of us on matters involving Sharia and the supremacism and jihadism that it demands of its followers. Welcome back, Robert. It's good to have you with us.
Always good to talk to you, Frank. Thank you.
Let me ask you, if I can, about a topic that is near and dear to both of our hearts, and that is the idea that the United States government would be in the business of deciding who is engaged in disinformation and presumably take steps to penalize them or at least prevent them from engaging in that. Disinformation is hardly the worst of the things that your great research has been described as, mine too. But talk a little bit about what Alejandro Mayorkas's new Disinformation Governance Board is up to and what a problem that represents.
Well, one of the biggest problems about it, Frank, is that nobody seems to be sure about what it's up to. Mayorkas and Jen Psaki have given uh, different answers as to what the scope of its authority will be and what exactly it will be doing. But it seems clear from the entire professional career of the chief of this board, Nina Jankowicz, that this is going to be targeting people who dissent from the administration's agenda and claiming that what they do is disinformation and must be silenced accordingly. Uh, the both Mayorkas and Psaki have specifically mentioned elections as being within the scope of this board's policing of disinformation. Now, of course, the obvious referent that they're talking about is the ongoing dispute about the validity of the 2020 presidential election. But then Mayorkas
Mhm.
says, and I think there's plenty of reason to be skeptical about this, that actually the board will not be dealing with American citizens at all. And so I think, okay, so what are we talking about? Elections in Peru or something? And the
Right.
United States government is going to be busying itself with accuracy about that? It's ridiculous. It's very clear that what they're talking about is clamping down on people who are contradicting the establishment line.
Yes. And this would be a very frontal assault on our First Amendment freedoms, of course. And it seems to me, and I know it does to you as well, it must not be allowed to go forward. And I pray that the Congress, the American people, will be heard from in very strong opposition to this initiative. Robert, let me turn to one other topic that you've touched on recently as uh, also of considerable importance, and that is President of the United States maintains that Muslims in the United States are being targeted with violence and Islamophobia. And again, you and I have been charged as Islamophobes, disinformation, slander, wrong. But what is he talking about? And what are the implications of the president engaging in this nonsense, disinformation, if you will?
Well, Frank, I'd like to know what he's talking about myself because I track jihad activity every day at jihadwatch.org. That means
You do
that I'm
brilliantly.
watching all manner of news sources regarding Muslims in the United States, Muslims elsewhere. I would venture to suggest, now, I'm not saying that I see everything, but I think that if Muslims in the United States were being subjected to targeted violence, that I would have seen that. And yet, there is absolutely nothing. I can't think of a single instance over the last few years that Biden could possibly be referring to. I think he's just
Mhm.
fabricating this out of whole cloth. And then the business about Islamophobia is even worse because that is a word that is persistently not defined. Islamophobia
Mhm.
is usually used for two quite distinct phenomena. One is targeted violence against innocent Muslims, which is never acceptable whenever
Mhm.
it may occur. And any honest analysis of the motivating ideology of jihad terrorism and the way jihadis use the texts and teachings of Islam to justify violence. The problem
Mhm.
is that when you conflate the two, which are not necessarily related at all, then you're going to have a clampdown on that honest analysis. And that's where this is tending to, especially in these days of the
Yeah.
Disinformation Governance Board.
Do you think that there's a likelihood that the reason the president is making these kinds of statements is because his government has been penetrated by Islamists, Muslim brothers, Sharia supremacists who are feeding this false narrative? And again, to what end?
There's no doubt about that at all, Frank. Unfortunately, we know that while he was running for president, he promised before a Muslim Brotherhood linked group that he would put Muslims at every level of his administration. And he's done so. And everybody he's appointed has some link to Muslim Brotherhood organizations. And so
Wow.
it's not at all
And
surprising.
what is the mission of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, Robert Spencer?
Eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house so that it
Yeah.
falls and Allah's religion rules over other religions. These are the words of a captured internal document of the Muslim Brotherhood, the notorious explanatory memorandum that the Center for
Mhm.
Security Policy has done so much to bring attention to.
Yeah. There's another phrase that was in there, as I recall, by their own hands
Yes, that's
was
right.
something that was
Yeah.
referred to, meaning we would be perpetrating
We're doing
some of
ourselves
this
in,
harm against us, indeed.
and here we are.
Robert, in terms of extremism, you had an interesting piece on your jihadwatch.org site, which again I commend to everyone, about someone who actually has been subjected to violence and, well, what one might call Islamophobia. A cleric in the United Kingdom. Talk a little bit about this fellow and why he has been a Muslim, uh, imam, pilloried and forced to flee for his life.
Yeah, this is a very interesting case. This is an imam in Manchester, in England, who spoke out in the course of the Manchester Arena jihad bombing inquiry against Islamic jihad activity. And it's noteworthy that instead of being applauded by his community, he actually has had to flee for his life and is in hiding because of the
Wow.
inundation of death threats he received. This is a disquieting indication of the fact that what is ordinarily termed a tiny minority of extremists is actually quite more considerable than most authorities in Britain as well as in the United States would like to admit.
Yeah. And that's a problem not just for the odd Muslim cleric who might denounce Sharia supremacism, if I could use that expression, but for the rest of us, obviously, who are all being targeted by the Muslim Brotherhood and others of this stripe for submission, as you know so well, Robert. Speaking of submission, there's this matter of Iran, Robert, and a deal that the Biden administration is pursuing so relentlessly, so fixedly, as to give rise to the most abject of submission, it seems, in terms of the concessions that it is making to try to get some sort of commitment, however fraudulent, however ephemeral as it might be, on the part of the Iranian mullahs that they actually won't finish getting the nuclear weapons they've long aspired to and have made such progress towards getting. Give us just a quick report on what's going on there, as best you can tell, and is it likely to prevent a nuclear weapon from getting into the hands of the arguably most dangerous regime on the planet?
Unfortunately, it's only going to enable the Iranians because it's going to give them billions of dollars in sanctions relief and in other money flowing in. And the Russians, it's extraordinary to me still that this is the case, but the
It
Iranians
really
have
is.
refused to negotiate with Biden's team. And so Biden has outsourced the negotiations to a Russian diplomat. And Russia is negotiating on the part of the United States, even amid the Ukraine war, to make a deal with Iran. And not surprisingly, the Russian negotiator has said that the deal that is about to be concluded is going to be extraordinarily favorable to Iran and China. He didn't say
Mm,
anything about it being favorable to the United States, but Biden's handlers
yeah.
don't seem to care about that. All they want to do is repudiate Trump by concluding a new Iran deal, no matter what, as you noted, no matter what the cost. And the cost to this looks as if it's going to be extraordinarily high.
It is going to be high indeed. And Robert, unfortunately, another beneficiary of this deal apparently is going to be Russia itself,
Yes.
which will have access to nuclear activities of Iran and an ability to garner all kinds of money as a result.
$10 billion to build.
At a moment when ostensibly we are trying to sanction and otherwise punish the Russian government. It is incredible. And if it weren't so serious, if the stakes were not so high and so dangerous, this would be, just ridiculous. But unfortunately, it is all of those things and more. Robert Spencer, thanks for the great work you do at jihadwatch.org. Come back to us again very soon if you would. Next up, Captain Jim Finnell, United States Navy retired, on China.